In this episode, I am joined by two expert campaign creators as we talk about how to take those first steps into your own campaign setting. And I share with you how we are planning on playing when we have a player or more down. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 41, Creating Campaigns and Continuing to Play. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I am your host, Inwils, and welcome to October. I hope you enjoyed last month's episode when our playing group talked about starting new players to the Mythras rule set. The plan is to do more of these chats with multiple people being involved, almost like a roundtable discussion. And don't worry, I will try and take a more silent role in them, since you must be getting very tired of my voice blabbering on about things. If you watch our actual play videos on YouTube or live on Twitch, you will be aware that we have gone from a group of 4 to a group of 5, 4 players and myself. Our new player is settling in well, and it is nice for me to actually focus mainly on GMing rather than trying to play another character as well. However, with more players there always comes the scheduling issues that we need to overcome. With everyone having different lives and our game actually stretching over 2 time zones, things can get difficult. Now, we always say that family, work and personal well-being, for example, health, always comes first. As a group, we made the decision quite a while ago that we would not play when one person was absent. We did try continuing with one player down, but we found that it became difficult to recognize what has been said to who, and if we finished the session in the middle of storming an evil lord's castle, it seemed strange that the character that was absent the week before suddenly returned from visiting their grandma, or whatever excuse we had created, and was actually down in the dungeon with the characters once again, as if nothing had happened. We stream our games live on Twitch, and I wanted to have a standby game that we could just pop into and play when we didn't have a full group. It was actually Medivac's idea that I thought was great. We discussed a range of ideas and thought we might have to actually play D&D 5th edition on these sessions when we weren't all around. However, luckily we found another option that we're all looking forward to playing. Anyway, enough of me waffling on. I'll let you know about the game we have chosen after the main segment of this month's podcast. If you are a GM or if you are thinking about taking up the GM mantle, then one of the first jobs you have to tackle is to create or develop your own campaign world. This can be very daunting, so we thought why not get 2 expert campaign creators onto the podcast to share how they approach the process. Now, apologies for Matt's next door neighbour dog barking while we were chatting. I did try to remove it but couldn't isolate the sound. So just think of it as added atmosphere. So without further ado, I'll let the experts introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Matt Eager, Matt E on the Discord. and I run Old Bones Publishing, and so we publish Mythras supplements and adventures. Not actual campaign source books yet, but I guess we'll touch on that today during our talk. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And off you go, Doug. Who are you?
Yeah, I am Doug Nordwall, otherwise known as Raleil on the Discord. I have been heavy into the Mythras community now, I suppose, for pushing on a decade at this point.
Wow, that's a lot longer than me altogether. So we're here today to talk about generating or starting off a campaign. And what I'm really interested in is to know about how you approach that as game masters when you're creating a setting. Where do you start with it? Do you sort of like look at the big picture or small picture to start off with? And what are your starting points? And hopefully people listening in will be able to think, oh, that's a good workflow to adopt. So Matt, let's start with you. Where, if you've got a new setting or a new campaign to create, whereabouts do you start from?
So I warn you right now, maybe Doug can provide some contrast. I don't know, he'll do what he wants to do, but I'm like a minimalist in terms of campaign creation. And I find myself always kind of warning people or suggesting to people on the Discord that, don't go nuts, don't do too much, because, 75% of this is never going to come out and play. But, if it's what gives you joy and that's part of what you like about being a GM and doing RPGs, okay, fine, go for it. All I'm trying to do is to give you my opinion based on decades of experience to try to encourage you to maybe identify and focus on the things that are really actually going to matter in real life and not get trapped into white room thinking. Sometimes you read someone's ideas and they're pretty cool, but when you get to the 10th page of backstory on why this generation of elves or wonderlings or whatever, all decided that they had to wear purple instead of green. I mean, come on, right?
I see. So a very minimalistic approach. How much would you do? Would you sort of like detail the first town or the hamlet, or where would your starting point be?
Right. I like to write characters most of all, I think. So I usually start on the very personal, small, intimate human level, or elf or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, so character is interesting in their own right, but then there should be a situation that, the character is confronted with, right? This is where the drama comes from, and this is where the plot comes from. So now we're talking about a character in a situation, and that sounds like an adventure, right? Or at least a scene in an adventure. That's usually where I start. Something compelling pops into my mind for whatever reason, the muse speaks, and that's usually where I begin.
Brilliant. Well, I usually do something, I would say, kind of similar to that, but I start with the conflict. Like what is ultimately the conflict that is going to be coming out of this, and this kind of works across the whole scale of things. So I did a classic fantasy game where the conflict was war, right? Like there was war happening, and so it was war within a region. So you have to define what that region is going to look like. But if you're doing something like a Monster Island campaign, and you're talking about a sandbox, the conflicts tend to be more episodic and contained from week to week, right? So you're defining it on a little bit smaller scale, and then from there it's when we start getting into like the details of what do the cultures look like, and what does the flora and fauna look like, and that sort of thing. That's sort of like more like, okay, what is the window dressing of this going to be like? So give you an example with my classic fantasy game. Originally, I was thinking it was going to be pretty stock, medieval European style fantasy. And then I thought, that is boring, just boring. And And I was like, I'm looking for something else. And then one of my players provided a convenient shim for that, where he said that he wanted to be a paladin of Ganesha. And I was like, well, that's perfect. Well, let's do that. Let's like, this whole thing is going to have a very different feel for it now. And that really carried the campaign, and it looked a lot different than it would have been if it had been done, medieval European style.
So you mentioned, Doug, about the players becoming involved. Is that something that you both like, players to be involved in the creation, almost like co-create the campaign world? What's your feelings about that?
I certainly like them to inject their opinions into the thing. I don't know that I necessarily want them to create huge portions of it, but I do like them to build up something on there, because I mean, frankly, it always helps to have somebody else build bricks with you, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
And I do really do like the world build. I'm with Matt that 75% of this is not going to see the light of day. If but if you enjoy it, do it. I mean, it is fun. I mean, I do that all the time.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? Co-creation with your players or not?
I feel I like that idea very much, and I think it helps to alleviate or avoid like boredom or disengagement. It promotes engagement. I feel the same way that Doug does, I think, but I would say it a little differently. Again, if you're starting down at the level of characters, people should play the characters that they want to play. You know what I mean? And so if your response to that is, well, that's not what I had in mind for this campaign, that doesn't fit well, right?
Yeah.
Well, in the very beginning, that's your chance to, adjust things, tailor things, and make sure that the people that you're going to be gaming with are, basically satisfied with the general trajectory of things. They're not going to be stuck off in an uninteresting corner or have to fight against the overall idea. Now, it may be true that sometimes, there are just irreconcilable differences, in which case, go away, friends, and, play two different games. But probably everyone can be grown-ups and work on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is also the time when you get to sort of communicate expectations between you and the players back and forth. I mean, I won't call it exactly a session zero, but it could easily be a part of that session zero, right?
Yeah.
It kind of like, let's communicate the tone of what this is going to be. If you've got somebody who says, I want to play a thin, fair skinned guy with a giant blade, with an anime haircut, that's going to mean something very different to, what the campaign is going to be about.
Right. Something else that Doug said, I think bears extra attention. In the beginning, he was talking about, designing a region, and he used the word sandbox itself. In the beginning, you need to decide whether you're going to, run a sandbox type game. And this is going to depend on the particular players that you've assembled too. Some people are very comfortable or expect or would be shocked if they didn't have the ability to say, all right, show me a map and I'll tell you where my players want to go and what they want to do. But there are other groups. My home group, really, we play sporadically now, but we still play sometimes. I think that if I threw them in like that, they would be rather surprised. I think that they prefer to, have a sense of, some kind of story arc and to have a little more served up to them. So if you have in mind like a TV style story arc where you're going to sit down and something's going to be presented to you, and then it's going to be improv television, so to speak, but you still have script writers that are doing right. So that's something you have to establish in the beginning too. Should this be a straight up sandbox? Should it be straight up episodic? Not a railroad, but what's sometimes called the bus stop model, which is there's kind of like a beginning in mind and an ending in mind, but there's all kinds of variability in the beginning. That's the kind of approach that I tend to take, especially because, ultimately I'm publishing adventures, right? So I want to give enough structure for the GM to feel like they have a handle on what's going to happen, or that if something weird happens, they still have 90% of the outcomes covered, right? And so they don't feel like a fish out of water. But yet at the same time, the players shouldn't feel like, they're just reading lines. That's bad.
Yeah, that doesn't really fly either. I mean, and now you got a full spectrum of stuff that comes out of this, right? Like, so you could go on full on West marches, which stereotypically is very player driven. The players say, I want to go to this place. Do we have a GM available? Who is available to do this thing? And that's highly player driven, versus the GM sits down and says, I want to run this sort of game. I want to run something that's based on Ale saga, in the Icelandic sagas, and that has a structure to it, right? Like that's an important thing. I think that's as important as trying to get the setting point or any of the conflicts set up first.
Yeah. Does we have an international audience listening to this, and you've both mentioned this idea of a sandbox. Could one of you just explain what that is so people will know what we're referring to?
Go ahead, Matt. You want to do it, or I could do it? I mean, it's.
Let me say something brief first, and then you correct me.
Sounds good.
Sure.
And again, I don't prefer and I don't write sandboxes. So from my point of view, a sandbox is an extremely player-driven kind of game, as opposed to GM-driven, where the GM will set up a bunch of stuff. And if you could imagine doing like an old school wilderness hex crawl, you have your map. Every hex has a secret page of description and monsters and treasures or whatever you're going to list for it. And then the players say, I want to go here. What happens if we go here? And then the GM, bases an adventure, or at least, several scenes according to that.
Yeah.
And which of course leapfrogs and will affect what happens next. So sandbox means, you just set something up in the backyard with a bunch of toys in a fairly well-defined space that's safe for the kids to play in. And then you let the kids go nuts, and you only every now and then supervise and stick your thumb on the when you need to.
Yeah, nice analogy. Doug, do you want to add anything to that, or?
I mean, and I think I agree that it is largely player driven, although it does tend to have some structure for them to hang on to, right? Like you need to give them enough to be curious about where to go with it, right? It is a very curiosity driven thing. So you set up some environments, some ecology, some adventure seeds that are in there. Most video games that we play nowadays, they have the quest question mark or something over an NPC that says, I have this thing that I want you to go and do it for me. And that's very sandboxy sort of play. There's no order that has to be pulled out of that, right? If to put it in the modern context with the video games, the campaign is the main arc, the main quest arc that comes out of it. There's a particular way that's supposed to go, and then all the side quests end up being the sandbox part of the campaign, right? And so video games, I think, do that pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that compared to when we were growing up, so to speak, with old school role-playing games.
I was only growing up all of 10 years ago, I'm sure. Yes.
I'm sure. Right. Yes. Yeah. We're all gentlemen of a certain age here. I think that we can dispense with the humor. Compared to the stuff that was served up by TSR back in the day, right? I think a lot of what goes on now can be informed well by video game design, probably. Things should be flexible and robust enough that your storyline doesn't break if players choose to do this or that. There's some stuff that's ready to go, and more importantly, there's enough perhaps unstated stuff that is on the GM's plate. Behind the scenes that the GM can, react quickly, just in time programming or game writing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you could easily start a campaign in either one of these sort of camps, right? Like, and most often mine end up sort of being in both camps because my players will get a wild hair and decide to go off and do something, and suddenly that's a sandbox, right? Like, right. I have to come up with something on the fly, or perhaps I have some adventure seed that I can pull off, or there's a plot line and I don't have anything really planned for that, so I'll throw in something that's a little bit more sandboxy. Or you could do a sandbox campaign where you have all of these little bits, and then you start putting in plot points along the way, and suddenly you have a campaign, and that might look something more like Star Trek: The Next Generation, where you have all these episodic things, and then all of a sudden there's an overarching arc that starts threading through many of the episodes, not all of them by any means, but you kind of get a sense of continuity that happens there.
Right. The example that I usually bring up in terms of television film is Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
Although, all right. Full disclosure, Joss Whedon is canceled. Straight up, fine. Okay.
Sure.
Looking at it as a piece of art, without knowing any of that,
sure.
It is extremely instructive to combine story arc with episodic pieces. You can learn a lot by watching a season of Buffy, I think.
Yeah.
One of the things that you both, and this would be very helpful for me as a GM, because you both sort of like mentioned or alluded to this idea of 75% of the won't never be seen, but I don't know when to stop. And when I'm creating a campaign, I'm always thinking, so what if the player asks this, or the player asks this? And then I'm almost like reluctant to start the campaign until I've almost like tied off every piece of string that relates to a story. What advice would you give to me or other people like me?
In full disclosure, that happens to me all the time, and still can happen. I've been running campaigns for a very long time at this point, and I still have some problems with it. But things I think that help. One, I do like random tables for stuff, because they allow you to fill in things, on the fly, and it allows me to overcome some analysis paralysis that I have with that. And so I might start with there. And the other thing is that you have to remember that you need to leave some slack in the campaign, because you're dealing with other humans and they're going to take something off differently, and you can't possibly predict all that they're going to do, because they're other humans and you don't have full insight to what they're thinking.
Right. Well said. That's good. I completely agree with both of you in the sense that it is very easy. I think I would go so far as to say probably a lot of people who enjoy GMing role-playing games are exactly the sort who would find it extremely easy to go down the rabbit hole. And again, if it brings you joy, that's fine, but just you ought to realize what you're doing before you do it. So that's why I'm always the negative Nelly who feels compelled to say, yes, but don't do it. Not because it's a bad thing to do or anything else, but I guess maybe because I'm a gentleman of a certain age, what I realize is, I only have so much time in a day or a week or a month to work on this. And I should be, I am a completionist. I try to be thoughtful in what I do, and therefore it is really easy to go off on tangents sometimes instead of working on the stuff that I really do think is more important, and I kind of have half baked up here, but I really should be putting that down on paper instead. There's another issue too, and that is, at some level, it's the power of memory, and maybe even not only the power of your own memory, but the power of the memory of the GM, who you don't even know who you're writing an adventure or
Sure.
a source book for. And, if you've got 50 pages of material and, all right, fine, PDFs are searchable. This is, the modern world and everything, but still, if you just see page after page after page of this stuff and it's not carefully enough annotated and it's got a lot of detail and maybe seemingly random stuff in there, your eyes glaze over and you tend not to internalize any of it. So although I do love my weird little details, I can give you examples until tomorrow.
We all do, I think. It's
right. I want to present to people things that are arranged in a way that makes sense and in a way that allows them to focus their attention on the important stuff, the stuff that's definitely going to come up, right? And the details are nice, but put them in little sidebars, keep it brief, and just include it for flavor and make sure they realize it for flavor. That I'm going through this right now with the adventure that is sprawling into a miniature setting or whatever that I'm writing now about this coastal city called Gitragam, right? And so, Gitrans love poetry, for example, and all Gitrans tend to have nicknames and stuff like that. So this is all the kind of, stuff that comes out. And I'm trying to keep it to gray sidebars and stuff, but I do throw it in there for the GM to use when, you're rolling up characters.
So I think a point to bring there is that stuff is very useful, but it's you may not use it, but you may having something there when the time comes, when the mood is right at the game table, right? Like the GMs and the players are in the right spot. That little bit of flavor, that spice, really does accentuate the game. But you got to remember that it's spice, right? Like you're not going to stop making the meal just because you don't have salt, because you're hungry, right?
Yeah, like it's the secret sauce. It's not the meal. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a thing that when you're doing your games or pretty much anybody's doing their games is to remember that there is the part that you're going to be presenting on a day, when you're at the game. That's going to be the plot. That's going to be the fun of it, and then there's going to be the spice. And you don't have to have every question answered there, right? Like you just don't. I mean, look at Monster Island; it leaves more questions than answers, right?
That's perfect, in my opinion. Anytime I write something, I want it to, for the customer, I want it to provide more questions than answers.
Sure.
And that's fine. It should stimulate the GM. It should stimulate the players. And part of the fun of RPGs is the improv, right? I mean, you don't want to feel like, again, you're thrown in, but at the same time, I don't want you trying to find the answer to this question on page 91. I want you to have enough of a feel, of a fluency for the setting that you're soaking in, that you can just say, Gitran.
You want to keep soaking, right? Like you don't want to you want to keep soaking in the setting, not getting up to go and deal with the front door, right? Like it's yeah.
Do you think experience and confidence really plays a part in how much you actually write down and how much you actually decide before that gaming session starts? Is it to do about how confident you are as GMs?
I think that's some of it, but I think for me, and I don't know that this applies to everybody, but I spend a lot of time thinking about how I am as a GM. Like I do a lot of self-reflection and analysis on that. And I go back and I do a post game with my folks and figure out what went right and wrong. And of course now, it's a lot faster. And I start to understand what has happened and have understanding of the flow of that. But I mean, I spend time on it, right? Like I spend serious time, not just on the campaign, but on my actual GM skills. Although I must admit, I've never watched a single episode of Critical Role, and I hear Matt Mercer is absolutely amazing, but I haven't watched a single one of those. So.
I can say I haven't either. So, Matt, have you watched any Critical Role?
Good question. I think that back when somebody first turned me on to it, I probably watched a half an episode, and I did watch the animated series that they based on it. That was amusing, but in my opinion, it went to point out a lot of the lot of the weirdness of that style of play. But anyway, going aside, I'm impressed. I'm impressed by Doug's dedication to the art. I'm much more of a half-assed game master. I think I am an okay game master. I think that I have a really good grasp of the rules, and because of that, I have the ability to keep things flowing and not stalling. I'm an okay actor in terms of characterization because I like characters, not because I'm good at the acting part. I'm not good at improv, but I do spend a lot of time, again, from the point of view of a character, thinking about how a character would behave or what a character would do in a certain situation. So, sorry, my neighbor's dog is barking.
All right.
Because I spend time thinking in character, I guess some people might call that method acting or whatever.
Yeah.
I call that not improv, but preparation.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
I avoid improv by doing that. But
sure.
Because I do this and because I have created the setting, I usually have a lot more half-formed or formless ideas that are contributing to what I'm doing in my head as GM. Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff that would not necessarily be written down. I agree. Now, when I'm writing something for sale to present to someone else who's going to GM what are basically my ideas, I have to kind of be judicious and remember, oh, I never actually wrote that. Or, oh, I have this in mind, but you know what? I really don't want to dedicate a paragraph to it. I would rather just leave that there for the other person to figure out and to make it their game. And that's ultimately what we always do. It's always going to be tailored at that level. There are going to be stuff that people make up because they forget or they think it's not written down, even if it is on page 91.
Yeah.
They're going to make stuff up at the edges, at least, even if the core is intact. And that's all right. That's good. That's the way things should be, in my opinion.
Do you both feel, if you know what characters the players are going to be playing in your campaign, does that direct you to provide more information about certain areas? For example, if you know that one of the players really wants to play a mystic in your campaign, would that encourage you to develop that side of the campaign, or does that not matter?
Oh, it absolutely matters. Absolutely. For me, I look at the characters as the pillar of the campaign, right? Like, and I need to know what those pillars are and where they are and how strong they're, right? Like, you know, you have players that do different things and they're going to respond to different things. And so understanding what how they're reacting to things really, really helps build that campaign a lot.
Yeah. I think that if you're gonna let's put it a slightly different way, and actually Doug is sounding a lot like me in this case. I think the characters are the lens through which this campaign is going to be viewed, sure. Right?
Yep.
The things that happen to them and the decisions that the players make about them and the places they go and the things they do. That is in a sense what the campaign is and how the world is reflected. You're going to go and read a transcript of it afterwards, which you can do if you play online.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think, you know, if you think about it, you know, you're doing this role-playing game. It's very much like writing a book in real time. Right. I mean, the stuff that's happening outside of the scope of the players, that generally gets pulled off into a separate chapter. And that's, you might think of that as the GM narration, right? Or perhaps those people become protagonists if you're a very ambitious GM and are running the same campaign world the same time with multiple groups or something like that. But those characters are the people that are in the book, and then you can only really see them from their perspective. Otherwise, you are doing just world building, right? Like it would just end up being you're building the world and you have this third person God perspective of it.
Yeah, very, very much so. And on that theme still, when do constraints come into the campaign? And I'll give you an example. So I run a human Mythras campaign, and there was no option for players to play dwarves or halflings or anything like that. I established that right at the beginning and said, you need to be human. And that's only because of my experience of 5e, when there's pigeons walking around, or minotaurs or things like that. When do you start to engage with those constraints, or do you just leave it completely open in your campaigns?
I'm like you. I establish those things up front. That is the level at which I draw the line, so to speak. I don't want to have to deal with dwarves. I don't want to have to deal with halflings. Everyone's going to be human, and if you're down with that, fine, let's continue. And if you're not down with that, maybe you're not going to be happy, and we should not go down this.
Yeah, I put my constraints in early as well. I mean, usually that ends up being a sort of session 0 activity. And I, on that notion of having dwarves and elves and whatnot, I think the thing that those really say is that your differences have to be visible. And if you're playing like in an all human campaign, your differences may not necessarily be visible, right? Like you have to have some sort of distinction.
Yeah.
Or I was thinking about this for my group, because I was going to present to them a Monster Island Savages Only game, right? Like it was all going to be everybody's lizard men, right? And so now you're all lizard men, and you are all of the same gender, because they have strongly gender divided roles, and this campaign was going to be about hunters, right?
Yeah.
And so they don't have these convenient shims for them to be saying my character has a niche because of this. Now you have to start defining yourself in some other way. You have to start defining yourself in role. Well, they're all hunters, so they're all going to be the same role. So that makes that even harder.
Yeah.
So now you have to define it by passions and personalities and secondary skills. And that's where you start to really get depth into the character, right? Like that's, you're not just the elf, the dwarf, because you're not leaning on a stereotype at that point.
Avoid stereotyping. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. So I would like to characterize this in terms of the short version. So there's the elevator pitch that you give for your campaign, right? This is going to be a sword and sorcery campaign about humans in a Robert E. Howard type world, right?
Sure.
If I say that to you, you should instantly have some genre shorthand, as I call it, that will support your thinking about this game. And you should probably instantly be able to say, oh, I do or do not want to play in that, right? Like, you're not going to pick up something randomly from the cereal aisle if you're really looking for tortilla chips, right?
You might have to explain what that sword and sorcery genre is, right? Like you might have to, like I remember a game that we were in a long time ago where somebody wanted to play an elf or something like that in the thing. I was like, you don't really fit in this campaign. That's not a genre conceit, right? Like that's outside of the scope. Go ahead. I have a long thought, so.
Okay. So there's that short version of your campaign, and that's going to be sort of the level at which you decide definitely yes or definitely no, right? And then after that, it's interfacing, it's making things work between what everybody wants. And then there's also the short version of your character concept. I like to think of, there's like a one-line character concept, And then there is the character concept that fits on a quarter page, right?
Yeah.
Half of a column in a 2-column layout, right? Because that's the way I think. And then there's all the other stuff that will come out in play as a consequence of both role playing and game mechanics that are tied to it, like passions and stuff, right? So that's the way I would say it. Now Doug has a long thought.
I do. So thinking about this notion of engaging with your restrictions on your campaign, I might think that the things that we normally talk about with campaigns are the lines in the art of the painting that you're picturing, right? Or that you're painting, but the restrictions are the shadows. The restrictions are the thing that gives a depth and that perception, that illusion of depth that you might see there, right? Then the negative space defines this as much as the positive space, and sometimes more than the positive space. So if I have a character, if I have a player who says, I want to do this, right? Like, let me I'll use something from my own campaign. I have a guy who wanted to be able to rip the skeletons out of people because this was a sword and sorcery thing, and it seemed very appropriate. I was like, okay, that's fine. Let's put some restrictions around that. Let's put some boundaries on that so that it's not just randomly ripping skeletons out of people as we go, because that doesn't happen in the books, right? Like, that's not very much fun. And it's not going to be, not going to make for a good game experience. And that's the other thing that I tell my players. I said, look, the restrictions are what make it a fun game experience, right? Otherwise you end up just being able to do whatever you like, and it's not really going to have any staying power whatsoever.
Exactly. That's why we roll dice instead of just telling a story, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a restriction, right?
I'm really interested in the starting point as in a place. And, when you put your characters into your campaigns, where do they actually start? So as an example, in the Odes campaign that I run, the players spent a lot of time in Lindo, which is the sort of like their base city. And I really wanted to experience the diversity of plot lines and NPCs and developing that interpersonal relationships with groups of people within Lindo. And they stayed there for quite a long time, many sessions before they went. Where would you be your perfect starting point in your campaigns?
As you say, a well-defined settlement. That is the place where you want to lavish detail initially in your world building. If you want them to be able to discover plot seeds or storylines, then you have to have a convincing way for that to happen. Probably it should be better than video game style. You walk into a shop and there's a question mark over the NPC's head, and you click on it and get it delivered to you. And there's this great piece of advice. I don't remember where I first read it, but it's great. Is that show them, don't tell them.
Yeah.
If you want people to know that there's some kind of, religious persecution going on, show them somebody being run down in the street and
exactly.
Or, show them defeated soldiers coming down the road looking for a place to sleep and food to eat. And then that's how they get turned on to that storyline that's going on to the north, right?
Very much so.
Yeah, you have to. And so I mean, really, that this is about the character scope of perception, right? Like, they can't perceive much bigger than a small community to start with, right? Like, they can't perceive all of New York in a shot, right? Like, they can't conceive of the United States unless as an entirety, unless you are really playing a different sort of game. I think Laws mentioned, like, they played Living Planets one time, and I'm like, well, I mean, what perception does a living planet right like, they're like, oh, we use Mythras for that, and I'm like, well, that's quite the statement, but like, it's really about the scope of their perception of what they're doing. So a smaller settlement works like that. Port Grimsend and Monster Island is a really good side for that. I will do a counter to this, and say that my most recent classic fantasy game, the war-based one, it started in a small community that promptly got raised, and it was pretty much immediate. Media res.
Yeah, in media res. Yes.
Yeah, there we go. And they arrive in the town. They go out to do something, and they see the army, and the army is coming. The army is 2 days out, and
don't tell them.
Right. And so they come back. They try to prep the town. They evacuate the refugees, and they go. And the next place up the road where the refugees go to is the actual small community that's more like the base, right?
Yeah.
But the entire region ends up being the sandbox that they kind of play in. So you do have to constrain it quite a bit by the scope of their perceptions and the scope of their travel ability. Compare that to something like take Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark. What's the scope of that, right?
Peripatetic, yeah.
Right. It kind of goes all over the world, and each one of those episodes has their particular scope, right? So just constrain it to the PC's perception.
Yeah, I really like that idea, and that I found that starting off in a city really inspired me to write the next adventure as the players explored the city, and when they suddenly went into the slums, that was time then for me to really start to flesh out that area. It's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you both. We've been talking for 40 minutes now, so I think we need to sort of round it up a bit, but hopefully you will both come back again and we can talk about other elements of the campaign that you create, maybe to do with organizations or religious sites, etc. But just before you both go, what would be your top tips to any person who's in that role of GM? Either they volunteered for it or they've been elected and they're starting off a campaign. What would be your top tips for them?
Go ahead, Matt.
Listen to your players so that you this is something that I meant to say earlier, but it's fine. If as Ian said, if someone wants to play a mystic, it's your responsibility as GM to know at least the basics of what that mystic order is going to be like, so that game mechanically the creative constraints that are in play. Well, you can't at starting stage in the Brotherhood, you can't rip someone's skeleton out by force of will, but maybe that's something you could build up to if you rose 3 notches.
Very nice.
So it's your responsibility as GM to be able to answer, at least in a satisfactory way, those kinds of questions. And by the way, why not get the player involved and help you write those details? And then you're pretty much guaranteed. And there's something else. When you're helping the players create their characters, get your short descriptions, get your long descriptions, then start rolling dice. Know what the character is about before you start actually building the character mechanically. And, if you play 2 sessions and things go weird, reserve the right to retcon things and say, oh, his passion really should have been this. Or, you're playing him much more like his int is 16, not 12. Stuff like that. You can fix those small things like that backwards if you need. Don't be afraid to do that. In terms of campaign, be sure that the player facing portions are in place, and show them, don't tell them. And showing them what's going on means understanding what's going on, not just in terms of the plot, but in terms of the setting. And so you have to have those details in mind at some level, even if you don't write them all down. Your comfort zone has to be such that you'll be able to answer questions. That's my tips.
Nice.
And I will add on just a couple of others. I agree with pretty much everything that Matt said on that. So I take my role as a GM seriously, and so I recommend other people do at least take the time to self-evaluate what they're doing. If you expect your players to be good players, also be a good GM, right? Like what's good for the goose is good for the gander there.
Sure.
When building your world and building the area, feel free to just use a big brush and just paint an area in one color. And then leave it blank past that, right? Like you have a theme. This is the slums. That's it. That's all you have to say about that. Because if you tell people that's a lot of shorthand, right? That should give your players a pretty good idea of what's going on there, and then spend some time defining what some central conflicts are going to be, right? Like if it's going to be an episodic game, then have a couple of quick conflicts, what they're going to be like. This is going to be a break-in into a building, or this is going to be helping an orphanage, or this is going to be a dungeon run against orcs. Those should be pretty tight, like much tighter than you would think that they would be. If you go and take a look at any of these one-shot adventures, they're tight. Like they are, 3 to 5 encounters, and that doesn't mean combat. That means things that happen. Those are my big ones.
Fantastic.
That could even be conflict. If you're going to integrate it with the setting, it could also not just be plot, but it could be thematically conflict. The drama. You can establish that very early on in the game too. Is this going to be about good versus evil, or uncovering mysteries that were better left unknown, and things that those are the kinds of things in terms of setting that a GM should probably have in mind. What is this game about? What do I want people to think about and maybe even learn about through role playing?
Right.
I don't pretend that RPGs have to be some big didactic thing, but it's really surprising the stuff that drops out of a game sometimes. Yeah. People really begin to think differently if everything's really going right? They're like, oh my God, this character really would never do that because they hate so-and-so or whatever, right? That kind of thinking.
Very much so. Thank you so much to both of you. I've learnt so much just sat here listening to your expertise, and it's certainly given me a lot to think about and a lot of things that I will change my mindset or my focus a little bit when I'm making the next campaign world. I really do like that idea of painting in those big strokes and then coming back to it if and when you need to, and letting the players have co-create those areas. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been fantastic talking to you, and hope to see you both here again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I learned so much listening to the discussion between Doug and Matt. We will definitely have them back on in the future to see how they tackle other aspects of a campaign world. And remember, if you have any topics that you would like us to cover, or if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not just drop me an email or message and let me know what you would like to cover. I'm always looking for reviews or interviews / chats with people. So if you are interested, you can email me at inwils@gmail.com or message me on the various forums and in the Discord. So before we all head off, what was our solutions to playing when we didn't have a full group of people for our usual game? Well, we are going to embark on a campaign based on the Mythras rules for superheroes. Yes, we are going to play Destined. Now, I have already started to create my own campaign world for the game using many of the tips that our experts provided, and we will be creating characters in the next available session. We felt that a superhero game really allowed for characters or players to be present or absent. They could always be called away or be investigating another plot line. Also, because the characters are supers, combat should be easily adapted for 1 to 3 heroes. We are really looking forward to playing the campaign once I've created the basics, taking a minimalist approach thanks to Matt, and it gives us an opportunity to wear our lycra on stream. Only joking. I could imagine the shocked looks on your faces as you heard that. If you have any solutions for when people are busy with real life when your game is scheduled to be played and how you overcome this, then please do let me know. And that's it, another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Don't forget you can check out all my content by following my YouTube channel and the campaign areas on World Anvil. I really appreciate your support, and do check out the Tapper Talk forums and the Discord, where there are some great people there sharing their ideas within discussions. So, until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat to you all again in November, when Loz and Brian will be joining us to talk about making submissions for publication to the design mechanism. It will be a great episode. Until then, I hope all your opposed roles succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.